Hello everyone, welcome back to Insomnia Protocol. Tonight, we have another terrifying horror story for you. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Now, get ready, and let's dive in. The wind chimes outside my grandfather's back porch started ringing at exactly 11:17 p.m. And the weird part wasn't the sound. It was the fact there wasn't any wind at all. I remember standing in the kitchen holding a half-empty mug of burnt coffee, staring through the dark window above the sink while those chimes kept clinking softly in the dead stillness, like somebody was moving them by hand. The trees beyond the field weren't moving. The old flag by the barn hung limp. Even the tall grass out near the fence line looked frozen in place under the moonlight. But the chimes kept going. Slow, uneven, metallic. I hadn't even unpacked most of my boxes yet. My grandfather had been buried 2 days earlier, and I was only staying at the farmhouse long enough to clear it out so the bank could sell the property before winter hit western Kansas. That was the plan, anyway. Simple, clean, practical. The kind of thing you tell yourself while standing inside a house that still smells faintly like the person who died there. Old coffee, dust, pipe tobacco soaked into the walls. I kept telling myself the sound had to be coming from somewhere else. Maybe loose metal. Maybe the old rain gutter shifting in the cold. But every time the chimes rang again, I could feel it in my stomach for some reason. Like my body was reacting before my brain caught up. I finally stepped closer to the sink window and looked out across the backyard. The porch light barely reached the edge of the grass. Beyond that was darkness stretching all the way toward the old cornfield behind the property. My grandfather stopped farming years ago, but the dead stalks were still out there, gray and brittle under the moonlight. I remember noticing something else then. The back porch door was cracked open maybe 2 inches. I knew for a fact I'd locked it early. The wind chimes rang again. Clink, clink, clink. Then stopped all at once. The silence afterward felt wrong, too complete. Like the entire property was listening for something. I stood there for a few seconds waiting to hear crickets or coyotes or traffic from the county road half a mile away. Nothing. Not even the refrigerator humming behind me. That was when I noticed the envelope taped to the fridge door. I swear it hadn't been there earlier. Yellow paper. My grandfather's handwriting. Thick black marker. Don't air th field after 11 p.m. Especially if the chimes stopped suddenly. I remember actually laughing under my breath when I read it, because grief does weird things to people, and my grandfather had always been paranoid as hell. When I was a kid, he used to unplug every radio in the house during electrical storms and make me stay away from the windows after dark whenever the dogs started barking toward the fields. My mom used to say living alone out there for 40 years made him superstitious. So standing there in that dim kitchen with his creepy note in my hand, I honestly thought maybe he'd written himself little reminders during his last years alone. Old man stuff. Dementia maybe. Still, I locked the back door again, just in case. Then I checked it twice before heading upstairs. The farmhouse felt colder after midnight, not normal cold either. Uneven cold. Pockets of it drifting through certain rooms while others stayed warm and stale. The hallway leading toward my old bedroom was freezing enough that I could see my breath for a second near the stairs. The rest of the second floor felt normal. I remember stopping halfway down the hallway because I heard something moving outside. At first I thought it was an animal in the cornfield. The sound was faint, dry rustling, like somebody slowly walking through dead stalks. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. I stood there listening longer than I should have. The movement stopped the second I focused on it. Then came 3 soft knocks downstairs. Tap, tap, tap. Not loud. Just enough to make me freeze. I looked down toward the staircase, expecting maybe a branch hitting the side of the house. But there wasn't any wind. The house stayed completely still. Another 3 knocks came a few seconds later. Same rhythm. Same spot. The back door. I don't know why I went downstairs. Looking back, that was probably the exact moment I crossed into something I couldn't back out of anymore. But fear doesn't always hit right away when things happen slowly. Mostly you just feel annoyed, confused. Your brain keeps trying to hand everything a logical explanation because the alternative feels ridiculous. I grabbed the fireplace poker near the living room and walked toward the kitchen. The clock on the microwave read 11:43 p.m. The knocks didn't come again until I reached the back door. Tap, tap, tap. This time softer, almost polite. I remember staring at the door while holding my breath without realizing it. Then I saw mud on the floorboards near the entrance. Long wet streaks leading from the cracked porch door toward the kitchen. My stomach tightened immediately because I knew those hadn't been there earlier. It looked almost like footprints, except wrong somehow. Too narrow, too long, like somebody had pressed sticks into wet dirt and dragged them across the wood. The wind chimes outside started ringing again, faster this time. Clink, clink, clink. I should have gone upstairs, locked myself in, called somebody. Instead, I unlocked the door and pulled it open maybe 3 inches. The porch was empty, just darkness and the smell of cold dirt. But the chimes were swinging hard, now even though the night air remained completely still. I could actually hear my own heartbeat at that point. Then I noticed the field. Something was standing between the dead corn rows about 30 yards from the house. Tall, motionless, too tall. At first my brain tried turning it into a scarecrow because that made more sense. But my grandfather hadn't used scarecrows in years. And this thing looked wrong. Its arms hung too low. The proportions felt off in a way I can't fully explain even now. I remember squinting into the darkness trying to make out details when the porch light suddenly flickered once behind me. In the reflection on the kitchen window, I saw the figure had moved closer. I spun around immediately. The field looked empty again. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. Then the wind chimes stopped. Instantly, every muscle in my body locked up because I suddenly remembered the second line of my grandfather's note. Especially if the chimes stopped suddenly. Something moved beside the barn. Fast. Not running exactly. More like unfolding out of the darkness for half a second before disappearing again. I slammed the back door shut hard enough to shake the walls and locked it so quickly I nearly dropped the deadbolt. The knocking started again almost immediately. This time from the kitchen window above the sink. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate, and somehow higher off the ground than any person should have been able to reach. I barely slept the rest of that night. Every time the knocking stopped, I'd start convincing myself I imagined the whole thing. Then a few minutes later, it would come back somewhere else in the house. Sometimes from the kitchen window, sometimes from the wall beside the staircase. Once from directly above my bedroom ceiling, slow enough that I could count each knock separately while staring into the dark with my entire body locked up under the blankets like a kid. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. The worst part wasn't even the sound itself. It was how patient it felt, like whatever was outside knew I was listening. Sometime around 3 in the morning, the wind chimes started again. Not loud this time. Soft, almost gentle. I remember sitting upright in bed staring toward the hallway while moonlight stretched across the floorboards through the cracked bedroom door. The farmhouse felt enormous at night, bigger than it ever had when I was younger. Every hallway seemed darker. Every room felt occupied somehow, even when empty. I checked my phone. No signal. That didn't make sense. I'd had at least one bar earlier in the evening. I walked over to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to look toward the backyard. The field sat motionless beneath the moonlight. Dead corn stalks swayed slightly now, though I still couldn't feel any wind against the glass. Then I noticed the barn door standing open. I knew that door had been closed before dark. My grandfather used to keep it chained shut because the structure was unstable. Half the roof had collapsed years ago during a winter storm. I remember him yelling at me once for trying to play inside it as a kid. He got genuinely angry about it too. More scared than angry, actually. "You stay out of that barn after sunset," he'd snap. At the time, I thought he was worried about rusty nails or the floor collapsing. Now I wasn't so sure. The wind chimes clinked again. I froze. There was somebody standing near the barn. At least I thought there was. The figure looked tall and thin, almost blending into the shadows beside the open doorway. I remember squinting hard, trying to decide if I was looking at an actual person or just darkness playing tricks on me. Then the shape moved. Not walking, not running, just shifting sideways in one smooth, unnatural motion before disappearing completely behind the barn wall. I shut the curtain immediately. That was the first moment real fear finally hit me. Not curiosity, not unease, fear. I actually grabbed my car keys off the nightstand because I seriously considered leaving right then. Driving the 3 hours back to Wichita in the middle of the night sounded completely reasonable at that point. But then my brain started doing what brains do. Maybe it was a trespasser. Maybe somebody messing around on abandoned property. Maybe grief and exhaustion were making me paranoid. I kept circling back to logic because the alternative felt impossible. Around 4:30, the knocking stopped completely. The silence afterward somehow felt even worse. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I remember was sunlight pushing through the curtains and the sound of tires crunching over gravel outside. For a second I forgot where I was. Then I saw the old floral wallpaper and the water stains spreading across the ceiling, and everything came back at once. The field, the knocking, the note, the thing beside the barn. I got dressed fast and looked outside. A faded blue pickup truck sat near the front porch. An older man wearing a brown work jacket stood by the mailbox holding a thermos. I recognized him immediately. Walter Green, my grandfather's nearest neighbor. He had to be pushing 70 now. Same gray beard. Same cigarette permanently hanging from the corner of his mouth. When I stepped outside onto the porch, he gave me this long look that instantly made me uncomfortable. "You stayed the night?" he said. Not even a question. I nodded. "Yeah. Why?" Walter looked past me toward the backyard. "You hear the chimes?" Something about the way he asked that made my stomach tighten. I tried laughing it off. Those things kept going all night. Probably loose in the cold or something. Walter didn't smile. He just kept staring toward the barn. "Your granddad ever tell you the rules?" That sentence alone changed the entire mood of the morning. Rules. Plural. I remember leaning against the porch railing, pretending not to feel nervous. "What rules?" Walter finally looked back at me. "Guess he figured keeping you away was safer." "Keeping me away from what exactly?" Instead of answering, Walter unscrewed his thermos and poured coffee into the lid. His hands were shaking slightly. "You see anything out there last night?" I hesitated too long. That was enough for him. Walter sighed quietly. "Damn it." He took a slow sip before speaking again. "Listen carefully. If those chimes start after dark, you stay inside. If they stop suddenly, you lock every door in the house immediately. And if you ever see somebody standing out in the field, looking toward the house, don't let it see you watching back." I stared at him. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part absolutely did not. "Walter," I said carefully, "what the hell are you talking about?" He looked exhausted suddenly. Older. "Your grandfather wasn't crazy," he muttered. The air felt colder after that. Walter refused to explain much else, no matter how hard I pushed. Every question got the same vague answers. Old stories, old mistakes, things buried out there before either of us were born. The entire conversation felt surreal, standing there under bright morning sunlight while crows picked through dead grass near the fence line. Eventually, Walter handed me a folded piece of paper. "Found this nailed inside my shed 3 winters ago," he said. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting matched my grandfather's. "Fit mohestiales Ephraim T field owen estar." Underneath that was another sentence. I looked back up. "What is this?" Walter crushed the cigarette beneath his boot. "Your grandfather lost his brother out there in 1978, he said quietly. Then he got into his truck and left. Just like that. No explanation. Goodbye." The gravel crackled loudly as his pickup disappeared down the county road. I stood there for a long time holding the note while the morning sun warmed the porch steps. Everything looked normal again. That almost made the night before feel stupid. Almost. I spent most of the afternoon cleaning the downstairs, trying to distract myself. Dust covered nearly every surface in the house. Old receipts, rusted tools, stacks of newspapers dating back 20 years. But the weird thing was I kept finding notes. Everywhere. Inside kitchen drawers, taped beneath cabinets, folded into books. Most were short warnings written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. K-E-H-E-R-S-T-A-F-D-R-M-E-D-E-H-T. That last one bothered me the most, because I realized I never had counted. Late that afternoon, I finally worked up enough nerve to check the barn. The sky had turned gray by then, Thick winter clouds rolling slowly across the fields. I remember grabbing the fireplace poker again before heading outside. The cold air smelled like dirt and snow. The barn looked even worse up close. Parts of the roof sagged inward. Several wooden boards had rotted black with age. But what really unsettled me were the marks around the doorway. Long scratches carved deep into the wood. Not random scratches either. Parallel. Repeated over and over like something sharp had been dragged downward across the frame for years. I stood there staring at them while my pulse slowly sped up. Then I noticed the wind chimes behind me, moving again, very softly. Clink. I turned toward the house. No wind. Not even enough to move the dead grass. Clink. The sound came again. This time accompanied by something else. A whistle. Faint. Far out in the cornfield. 3 slow notes drifting through the dead stalks. My entire body went cold, because even from that distance, I recognized the tune immediately. My grandfather used to whistle it constantly when I was a kid, and he'd been dead for 4 days. I didn't realize I'd started backing away from the barn until my heel caught the edge of the porch steps behind me. The whistle drifted across the field again. 3 slow notes. Calm. Familiar. Wrong. The dead corn stalks swayed softly beneath the gray evening sky, while the wind chimes tapped together above the porch like nervous teeth. Clink. Clink. I kept staring toward the field, waiting to see movement between the rows. But everything looked empty. Just endless strips of brittle gray stalks stretching toward the tree line in the distance. My brain immediately started trying to rationalize it again. Somebody local, maybe. Some sick joke after my grandfather's funeral. But deep down I already knew the sound was identical. Same rhythm. Same pause between notes. My grandfather used to whistle that tune while repairing fences or carrying feed buckets across the property. I heard it every summer growing up. Another whistle came. Closer this time. Not much closer, but enough. I went inside immediately and locked the back door hard enough to rattle the glass. The kitchen suddenly felt darker, even though it wasn't fully night yet. Gray winter light spilled weakly through the windows, while the old farmhouse creaked softly around me. I stood there breathing hard, listening for more whistling outside. Nothing. Only silence again. That silence kept becoming the thing I feared most. Not the sounds. The silence after them. I checked the clock on the stove. 5:41 p.m. Sunset still had at least 40 minutes left, but the clouds rolling over western Kansas made everything look later than it was. I remember thinking about Walter Green's face that morning. He hadn't looked crazy. Nervous, maybe. Exhausted, definitely. But not crazy. And my grandfather's notes were everywhere now. Too many to ignore. I started searching the house more carefully after that. Not cleaning anymore. Searching. By 6:30 I'd found 17 notes hidden throughout the downstairs alone. Some were taped behind picture frames. Others folded into drawers or shoved beneath furniture cushions, like my grandfather expected someone else to eventually find them. Most warnings repeated the same ideas over and over. KEPHNAF tar dark if just a star having suema e ekadewaf. Methake. One note inside the laundry room made my stomach tighten harder than the others. Ietiolo yil familiar stanai bevion nas bioftimhar. I read that line 3 times. Someone who looks familiar. My grandfather's brother disappeared in 1978. Walter mentioned that almost casually, but now the sentence kept replaying in my head while darkness slowly settled outside the farmhouse windows. Around 7 the power flickered once. Just a quick blink, but it was enough to make every muscle in my body tense instantly. I looked outside. Snow had started falling lightly over the property. Thin white streaks drifting across the field beneath the deepening blue-gray sky. The wind chimes moved softly again. Clink, clink, clink. I avoided looking directly toward the field after that. Instead, I grabbed every flashlight I could find from the kitchen drawers and checked the batteries while the house grew darker around me. The storm clouds swallowed the last sunlight fast. By 7:30, the property looked isolated enough to belong on another planet. No headlights from the county road. No neighboring porch lights. Just darkness stretching across dead farmland beneath falling snow. Then the phone rang. The sound nearly stopped my heart. The old wall phone near the refrigerator screamed through the kitchen so suddenly I actually dropped one of the flashlights onto the floorboards. Nobody used that line anymore. I stared at it ringing while my pulse hammered in my throat. Once, twice, 3 times. I finally answered on the 4th ring. Hello. Static crackled loudly through the receiver. Then breathing. Slow and even breathing. Walter, I asked. No answer, just static. Then a voice whispered very softly through the line. Don't let it in tonight. My stomach dropped immediately because the voice sounded exactly like my grandfather. Before I could speak again, the line went dead. I stood frozen in the kitchen staring at the receiver while the dial tone hummed faintly in my ear. The house suddenly felt occupied. Not physically maybe, but aware somehow. Like something inside it had started paying attention to me. Then came 3 knocks from upstairs. Tap, tap, tap. Every hair on my arms stood up instantly. The knocks came from directly above the kitchen ceiling. Slow, deliberate, the same rhythm as before. I hung up the phone carefully and listened. Silence followed for maybe 10 seconds. Then another 3 knocks. This time from the hallway upstairs. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed the fireplace poker again before realizing my hands were shaking too badly to hold it steady. The rational part of my brain kept insisting old houses make noise during storms. Pipes expand, wood shifts. But old houses don't knock back in patterns. The 3rd set of knocks came from the staircase itself. Much closer now. Tap, tap, tap. I backed toward the kitchen counter instinctively, while staring at the dark hallway leading toward the stairs. My breathing sounded too loud in the silence. Then I heard something else. Wet footsteps above me. Slow dragging footsteps moving across the 2nd floor hallway. Creak, drag, creak, drag. I remember yelling before I even realized I was going to. Who's there? The footsteps stopped immediately. Silence filled the house again. Then came a sound that nearly made me vomit from pure instinctive fear. My grandfather's whistle. Inside the house. 3 slow notes drifting softly from the top of the staircase. I couldn't move for a second. Couldn't breathe either. The whistle came again, slightly louder this time. Then a voice followed it. A lie. Barely above a whisper. My grandfather's exact voice. Come upstairs. Every survival instinct in my body screamed at me not to move. I backed farther into the kitchen while gripping the poker with both hands. Who the hell is this? I shouted. No response. Then the upstairs hallway light flicked on by itself. Warm yellow light spilled down the staircase, revealing nothing there. Empty steps. Empty hallway. But the voice came again. Closer now somehow. I need help up here. Tears actually stung my eyes for a second, because grief and terror were colliding in ways my brain couldn't process correctly anymore. Part of me knew it wasn't him. Another part wanted it to be so badly I almost started climbing the stairs. Then the wind chimes outside exploded into violent movement. Clink, 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 clink. Loud enough to shake through the entire kitchen. The hallway light upstairs instantly shut off again. Total darkness swallowed the staircase. And from somewhere near the top step something moved fast. Too fast. I only caught pieces of it in the darkness. Tall shape. Bent limbs. One arm dragging strangely against the wall as it disappeared deeper into the 2nd floor hallway. I stumbled backwards so hard I slammed into the refrigerator. Magnets and old papers scattered onto the floor. One yellow note drifted near my feet. I recognized my grandfather's handwriting immediately. TGESPSTAR dark ATI anim OR. My chest tightened painfully. The storm outside intensified while snow rattled softly against the windows. Then came another sound from somewhere beyond the backyard. A whistle answering back from the field. Then another farther away, and another. Different distances. Same tune. Like multiple voices signaling each other across the property. The wind chimes suddenly stopped. Complete silence crushed the farmhouse. Then something heavy slammed once against the back porch door hard enough to shake the walls. Boom. I froze completely. Another impact hit seconds later. Boom. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams overhead. Whatever stood outside no longer sounded patient. Then came scratching. Slow, deliberate scratching dragging across the wooden back door like fingernails searching for a way through. The scratching continued for nearly a full minute without stopping. Slow, methodical, like something outside was carefully feeling along the wood searching for weak spots. I stood frozen in the kitchen gripping the fireplace poker while the storm hissed against the windows and those whistles drifted faintly through the field beyond the house. Every sound seemed connected somehow. The scratching, the whistles, the wind chimes, like different parts of the same thing moving around the property together. Then the back door handle slowly turned once. My entire body locked up. The deadbolt rattled softly beneath the pressure. Not violent, not desperate. Calm, curious, like whoever stood outside already knew the lock wouldn't matter eventually. The scratching stopped immediately afterward. Silence settled over the kitchen again, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator behind me. I remember realizing then how hard my heart was pounding, because suddenly I could hear it echoing inside my ears. I backed slowly toward the living room without taking my eyes off the door. Another soft turn of the handle came a few seconds later. Then 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Same rhythm, same patience. My grandfather's note lay crumpled near the refrigerator. IDISM, The upstairs hallway creaked overhead. Something heavy moved slowly across the second floor. Creak, drag, creak, drag. The thing upstairs hadn't left, and whatever stood outside wanted in. For the first time since arriving at the farmhouse, I truly understood isolation. The nearest neighbor sat almost a mile away. Snow covered the county roads now. My phone still had no signal. The farmhouse suddenly felt cut off from the rest of the world in a way that went beyond geography. Like the property itself existed slightly apart from normal life after dark. Another whistle drifted from the field. Closer now. The sound made my stomach tighten immediately, because I could tell it came from behind the barn this time. Something had moved nearer to the house. Then came a voice outside the back door. Ali. Soft. Familiar. My grandfather again. Opened the door. Tears stung my eyes instantly from pure reflex. The human brain reacts before logic sometimes. Hearing his voice pulled memories out of me automatically. Summers fishing at the creek behind the property. Him teaching me how to patch fence wire. The smell of his old work gloves. Then the voice spoke again. It's cold out here. That almost broke me because it sounded exactly like something he would have said. Same tired tone. Same slight rasp underneath the words. But underneath all that familiarity sat something empty, like listening to a recording played slightly wrong. I forced myself backward another step. You're not him, I whispered. Silence answered me for several seconds. Then the voice outside laughed softly, not loud. Just one quiet breath of amusement that instantly felt inhuman. The back porch light flickered twice. I caught movement through the kitchen window beside the door. Tall shape passing slowly across the porch. Its head nearly reached the top of the frame. I stumbled farther into the living room while keeping the poker raised uselessly in front of me. The floorboards upstairs groaned again. Then came another sound from above, my bedroom door opening slowly. I could hear the hinges clearly. The thing upstairs was moving room to room now, searching. The storm intensified outside while snow tapped rapidly against the windows. The lights flickered once more throughout the farmhouse. For half a second, the entire house went dark. In that brief blackout, I heard footsteps directly behind me in the living room. I spun around instantly, swinging the poker hard through empty air just as the lights returned. Nothing stood there, but the room felt colder now, much colder. My breath fogged faintly in front of my face. Then I noticed the photograph sitting on the coffee table. I froze immediately because I knew it hadn't been there earlier. Old Polaroid. Faded edges. My grandfather standing beside the barn sometime during the 70s from the look of his clothes. Another figure stood behind him near the cornfield. Tall. Blurry. Almost hidden by darkness. Someone had written across the bottom in black marker. ITMENV. A loud crash exploded upstairs. I jumped so violently I nearly dropped the poker. Another crash followed immediately after from my old bedroom. Furniture overturning. Drawers slamming open. Then footsteps raced across the second floor hallway impossibly fast. Not human footsteps anymore. Too many impacts. Too uneven. Like several limbs striking the floor at once. The movement stopped directly above the living room ceiling. Silence followed. Then something heavy dragged slowly across the floor overhead. My eyes locked onto the ceiling instinctively. Dust drifted down from the beams. Another scrape came directly above me, then a wet thump. Something dark splattered onto the wooden floor beside the couch. I stared at it for a second before realizing it was mud. Thick black mud dripping through the ceiling boards. More drops followed. Plop, plop. The smell hit next. Wet earth and rot. I backed toward the fireplace while staring upward in disbelief. Then the ceiling creaked hard above me. A long crack slowly spread across the plaster overhead. Something heavy crouched directly above the living room now. I could hear it breathing, slow wet breaths filtering through the ceiling boards. Then came my grandfather's whistle again. Directly above my head, 3 slow notes. I ran. Pure instinct finally overpowered confusion. I bolted toward the kitchen, grabbing my truck keys from the counter as I passed. The back door remained shut, but muddy streaks now covered nearly the entire frame. Long handprints stretched across the wood several feet above where any normal person could reach. The front door felt safer somehow, so I sprinted through the hallway toward the porch entrance. Another loud impact shook the ceiling behind me. Wood splintered upstairs. Something began moving rapidly down the staircase. Thump, 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 thump. Too many limbs again. I yanked the front door open and nearly slipped on snow covering the porch steps. Freezing wind hit my face hard while I stumbled toward my truck parked beside the gravel drive. The farmhouse behind me looked enormous against the storm-dark sky. Several upstairs lights flickered on and off randomly through the windows. Movement crossed one of them. Tall silhouette passing sideways through the second-floor hallway. I reached the truck, jammed the key into the ignition, and turned it hard. Nothing happened. The engine clicked once and died. "Come on," I muttered desperately while trying again. Another weak click answered me. The porch light behind the house suddenly shut off. Darkness swallowed the property except for moonlight, reflecting faintly off the snow. Then the wind chimes began ringing violently. Clink, 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 clink. I looked toward the field automatically. Shapes stood among the dead corn now. Multiple shapes, motionless beneath the snowfall. Some tall, some bent strangely sideways, all facing the house. My chest tightened painfully. Then one of them moved, not toward the farmhouse, toward me. Fast, much too fast. It crossed several rows of dead corn in seconds, with long unnatural strides that barely seemed connected to the ground. I threw myself out of the truck just as something slammed against the side hard enough to dent the metal inward with a deafening bang. I hit the snow hard beside the gravel driveway while the truck alarm exploded into noise behind me. The thing that struck it vanished immediately into darkness again. I scrambled backward on my hands trying to breathe while the alarm echoed across the property. Then all at once every whistle from the field stopped. Total silence fell. Even the truck alarm died mid-sound. For one horrible second the entire world seemed frozen. Then a voice spoke softly from behind me near the barn. "Ali." I turned slowly. A figure stood in the open barn doorway, barely visible beneath the falling snow. Same coat my grandfather used to wear, same posture, same shape, but too tall now. Its arms hung almost to its knees. And when lightning flashed far off beyond the fields, I saw its face smiling much wider than any human face should have been able to smile. For a second I honestly thought it was him. That was the worst part. Not the height, not the smile, not even the way its arms hung too low beneath the sleeves of my grandfather's old coat. It was the tiny familiar details that nearly broke my brain apart standing there in the snow. The slight tilt of the head, the way he always kept one shoulder lower because of an old farming injury. Even the outline of the hat looked right. My chest tightened so hard it hurt while freezing wind pushed snow across the driveway between us. The thing standing in the barn doorway didn't move at first. It just watched me. Then it whistled softly. 3 slow notes. My grandfather's tune. Somewhere behind the farmhouse another whistle answered from the field. Then another farther away. The shapes among the dead corn still stood motionless beneath the storm. Waiting. Watching. I stumbled backward through the snow toward the porch while gripping the fireplace poker so tightly my hands ached. "What do you want?" I shouted before I could stop myself. The figure smiled wider. I swear its jaw shifted slightly when it did, stretching farther than human skin should have stretched. Then it spoke in my grandfather's exact voice. "You came back." The barn light flickered weakly overhead, revealing more of its face for half a second. Pale skin pulled too tight around the mouth, eyes too dark. The left side of its neck bent strangely, as if something inside the body didn't sit correctly anymore. I backed onto the porch steps, breathing hard, while trying not to look directly at the field. Because part of me knew if I focused long enough, I'd see the other shapes getting closer. The thing in the barn took one slow step forward. Its boots dragged unnaturally across the wood. "You shouldn't have opened the door," it whispered. Then the porch light above me exploded. Glass showered across the steps, while darkness swallowed the property again. I nearly slipped trying to force the front door open behind me. The old lock jammed once before finally giving way. I threw myself inside and slammed it shut hard enough to rattle the walls. The house immediately felt wrong. Too quiet. The temperature had dropped even further while I'd been outside. My breath fogged thick in front of me now. Somewhere upstairs something creaked slowly across the hallway floorboards again. Creak, drag, creak, drag. The thing upstairs never left. I locked the front door and backed away from it, while staring through the narrow glass window beside the frame. Snow swirled violently across the porch. Nothing stood outside anymore, but the feeling of being watched had become overwhelming. Then came the knocking. Not from outside this time, from inside the walls. Tap, tap, tap. I froze instantly. The sound came from somewhere near the kitchen first, then farther down the hallway, then upstairs, like something moving through the house itself. The old pipes groaned softly behind the walls while the storm intensified outside. I remember realizing then that the farmhouse no longer felt like shelter. It felt occupied. The whistle drifted faintly through the ceiling above me again. Slow, calm, patient. I forced myself toward the kitchen because standing still somehow felt worse. Every room looked slightly different now, under the weak yellow lights. Shadows stretched longer than they should have. The old family photographs hanging near the hallway suddenly made my skin crawl. Every smiling face felt wrong under the flickering light. Then I noticed one frame hanging crooked near the pantry door. I knew it had been straight earlier. I stepped closer carefully. The photograph showed my grandfather standing beside the barn sometime in the 80s, but another figure stood near the field behind him. Tall, thin, blurry from distance. I swallowed hard. That figure hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. Then I noticed writing scratched faintly into the glass itself. A.T. Madiwai S.F.I.E. My stomach dropped. Another knock echoed through the walls. Closer now. Tap, tap, tap. The pantry door creaked softly behind me. I turned immediately. The door stood slightly open. Cold air drifted through the crack, carrying the smell of wet earth and mildew. I remembered closing that door earlier while searching the house. Slowly I stepped forward and pulled it open wider. The flashlight beam shook violently in my hand as it swept across shelves of canned food and dusty jars. Nothing unusual at first. Then lower, toward the floorboards beneath the shelves. Scratches covered the wood there. Deep parallel marks gouged into the floor repeatedly, as if something had clawed at it from underneath. I crouched lower, trying to understand what I was seeing. That was when I noticed the outline. A seam hidden beneath years of dirt and dust. Rectangular. My pulse spiked instantly. There was a door built into the pantry floor. Another whistle drifted through the house, this time directly beneath my feet. I stumbled backward immediately. The knocking started again below the floorboards now. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, deliberate. I stared at the hidden door while my entire body went numb with dread. My grandfather had lived in this house for 40 years, and somehow there was an entire section hidden beneath it. Then I remembered Walter saying my grandfather lost his brother in 1978. Lost him out there. The thought suddenly felt incomplete. Maybe he hadn't disappeared in the field. Maybe something came back wearing pieces of him afterward. A loud thud slammed beneath the floor hard enough to shake the pantry shelves. Several glass jars crashed down and shattered around my feet. Then came a voice from under the hidden door. Weak. Human. Help me. I nearly dropped the flashlight. It sounded exactly like Walter Green. The voice whispered shakily. Don't let him open it. Another impact hit from below. Much harder this time. Boom. Dust burst upward through the seams in the floorboards. The pantry light flickered violently overhead. "Walter," I shouted instinctively. Silence followed for several seconds. Then another voice answered from below. "My grandfather again. He lied to you." My chest tightened painfully. The thing beneath the floor continued speaking softly. Calmly, "Walter opened the field first." I backed away from the pantry completely now, while gripping the revolver I'd taken from the upstairs bedroom drawer earlier. My mind kept trying to reject everything happening around me. Hidden basement, voices underground, creatures in the field wearing familiar faces. None of it should have been possible. Yet the fear felt too physical to deny anymore. Then the wind chimes outside started ringing violently again. Clink, 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 clink. At the exact same moment, every light inside the farmhouse went out. Darkness swallowed everything instantly. The silence afterward lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then footsteps erupted upstairs. Fast, heavy, too many at once. Something sprinted across the second-floor hallway, directly above me, while the hidden door beneath the pantry began shaking violently from impacts below. Boom, boom, boom. I raised the revolver blindly toward the darkness, while my breathing turned ragged. Another whistle came from somewhere inside the kitchen now. Not outside, inside. Then lightning flashed through the windows for half a second. In that brief burst of white light, I saw someone standing at the far end of the hallway near the staircase. Tall figure, head tilted sideways unnaturally far, smiling. The darkness swallowed it again immediately. Then came my grandfather's voice from only a few feet away. It whispered softly, "It's already upstairs." I fired the revolver before I even realized my finger had pulled the trigger. The gunshot exploded through the dark hallway and lit the farmhouse in a violent burst of orange light for half a second. I saw the figure clearly that time. My grandfather's coat hanging too loose around a body that bent wrong beneath it. Arms too long, fingers nearly reaching its knees. Its smile stretched impossibly wide across a face that looked unfinished somehow, like something trying very hard to imitate a human expression without fully understanding how. Then darkness swallowed everything again. The shot deafened me for a second. My ears rang while I stumbled backward into the kitchen counter hard enough to knock silverware across the floor. The thing in the hallway vanished immediately after the gunshot. No footsteps, no movement, just silence. Then the knocking beneath the pantry floor stopped too. Completely. That silence felt worse than the noise. It felt expectant, like the entire house had paused to listen. The storm outside hissed against the windows, while lightning flashed faintly beyond the field. I remember fumbling desperately for the flashlight on the counter. My fingers felt numb from cold and panic. When the beam finally flickered on, the hallway stood empty again, but muddy streaks now covered the wallpaper near the staircase, long handprints dragging upward toward the second-floor ceiling. The smell inside the house had changed too. The damp earth smell from the hidden door had spread everywhere now, mixing with old wood and something faintly rotten underneath it. Then came the whistle again, upstairs. 3 slow notes drifting softly through the darkness above me. My stomach tightened instantly because the sound moved this time. It started near my old bedroom, then slowly drifted farther down the hallway, as if something walked while whistling. I forced myself to breathe slowly while gripping the revolver with one hand and the flashlight with the other. My brain kept trying to find rational pieces to hold on to, but there weren't any left anymore. I had seen it clearly. Whatever wore my grandfather's face wasn't human. Another floorboard creaked upstairs. Then a voice whispered faintly from above. "He's awake now." That voice didn't sound like my grandfather. Younger, male, terrified. Walter had said my grandfather lost his brother in 1978. I suddenly couldn't stop thinking about the scratched-out face in the photograph downstairs. My flashlight beam drifted toward the staircase almost against my will. The second floor sat completely dark except for weak moonlight leaking through the hallway window above. Then I noticed something that made my blood go cold. Wet footprints covered the stairs now. Bare footprints. Long narrow toes stretched unnaturally far across the wood. They led upward into darkness. Another whistle drifted through the hallway. Closer this time. I should have stayed downstairs. Every instinct told me that. But fear does strange things after a while. Once terror passes a certain point, curiosity starts mixing into it. Desperation too. I needed answers. I needed to know what my grandfather had spent 40 years hiding inside this house. Slowly I climbed the stairs while the flashlight beam trembled violently across the walls. Every old family picture seemed wrong now. Faces looked distorted in the dim light, eyes appearing to follow movement. Halfway up the staircase, I noticed deep scratches carved into the wooden railing. Not recent scratches either. Old ones, repeated over years. Like someone had clawed the same spots over and over again during panic. The second floor air felt freezing compared to downstairs. My breath fogged heavily now while the flashlight beam cut weakly through the darkness ahead. The hallway stretched silent and narrow beneath cracked wallpaper and water stains spreading across the ceiling. My old bedroom door stood open at the far end. Something moved inside, just barely. I raised the revolver instinctively. "Who's there?" I whispered. Silence followed. Then came a soft reply from inside the room. "You shouldn't have come back here." The voice sounded human. Weak. Older. My pulse hammered harder while I stepped closer. The flashlight beam swept slowly into the room. The bed sat overturned against one wall. The dresser drawers had been ripped open and scattered across the floor. Mud covered nearly every surface. But what stopped me cold was the writing on the wall above the bed. Hundreds of sentences scratched directly into the wallpaper in shaky handwriting. Dukina itspika far you. My grandfather's handwriting covered every inch of the wall, layer over layer until the words became almost unreadable. Then my flashlight landed on the closet door. Fresh mud streaked across it from inside. Something had been trying to get out. A floorboard creaked behind me in the hallway. I spun instantly. Nothing there. But the temperature dropped sharply again. Cold enough to hurt my lungs when I breathed. Then the whistle came from directly behind the closet door. 3 slow notes. My entire body locked up. The closet handle slowly turned once, then stopped. Another turn followed. The wood creaked softly inward. I backed away, raising the revolver with both hands. "Don't," a voice whispered suddenly from the hallway behind me. I turned sharply again. A man stood at the far end of the hallway near the staircase. Pale, thin, maybe mid-30s. He wore old denim overalls stained with dirt and water. His face looked horribly tired. For one impossible second, I thought I was looking at an old photograph come to life, because he resembled my grandfather so much it hurt. Same eyes, same jawline, just younger. "You can see me now," he whispered weakly. My mouth went dry instantly. "Who are you?" The man glanced toward the closet door behind me. Terror crossed his face. "It uses dead things first," he whispered. Then memories, then voices. The closet door creaked open another inch behind me. I could hear breathing inside it now. Wet, uneven breathing. "You're not real," I muttered automatically because my brain couldn't process anything else. The man ignored that completely. "He thought he buried it," he said. "Your grandfather thought the house could hold it." Lightning flashed outside suddenly, illuminating the hallway bright white for half a second. The man near the staircase vanished, gone instantly. The closet door behind me slammed fully open. I turned so fast the flashlight beam nearly slipped from my hand. Something crouched inside the closet darkness. Tall shape folded unnaturally small against the back wall. My grandfather's face stared out at me from the dark, smiling too wide again. But the eyes were wrong now. Completely black. It whispered softly. "He left me down there alone." The voice changed halfway through the sentence. My grandfather at first. Then another voice underneath it. Younger. Cracking with fear. "Please." My chest tightened violently because suddenly I understood. The thing wasn't just mimicking voices. It was mixing them together. Wearing pieces of people. The creature slowly unfolded itself from the closet with long cracking movements like joints bending the wrong direction. Bones popped softly beneath the skin while it stood taller and taller until its head nearly touched the ceiling. The revolver shook so badly in my hand I could barely aim. Then the thing smiled wider and whispered in my grandfather's voice again. It opened the second door. Somewhere downstairs beneath the pantry, Something massive slammed once against the hidden floor hard enough to shake the entire house. The impact beneath the floor felt powerful enough to lift the entire farmhouse for half a second. Dust burst from the ceiling beams while every light fixture in the hallway swung violently overhead. The creature standing inside the bedroom doorway tilted its head slowly toward the floor beneath us, as if listening to something waking up far below the house. Then it smiled wider. I stumbled backward into the hallway with the revolver aimed directly at its face, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the barrel steady. The thing unfolded farther out of the closet with long, wet, cracking sounds coming from its limbs. My grandfather's face kept shifting subtly while it moved, skin twitching around the mouth, eyes darkening, and then briefly looking human again before turning black, like several expressions were fighting underneath the surface. Then it spoke using two voices layered together. He couldn't keep the door closed forever. Another violent slam erupted from beneath the house. Boom. The floorboards trembled beneath my boots. Somewhere downstairs, glass shattered in the kitchen. I backed farther down the hallway while keeping the flashlight beam locked on the thing crawling slowly toward me. It didn't move like an animal exactly, more like a puppet being dragged forward by invisible strings, limbs jerking too far before correcting themselves. Every motion looked wrong by a fraction that made my stomach twist. Then from downstairs came another voice, Walter Green screaming, "Ellie, don't let it out!" The sound hit me like a punch because it felt completely real. Human. Desperate. I glanced instinctively toward the staircase. The creature smiled immediately after noticing. It learned him quickly. It whispered. My pulse exploded. The thing knew exactly what it was doing. Every voice, every memory, every familiar sound existed only to pull attention away long enough for it to get closer. Another floorboard creaked behind me. I turned sharply and nearly fired the revolver. A woman stood at the far end of the hallway near the bathroom door. Pale face, blonde hair hanging wet against her shoulders. She wore an old nightgown stained dark around the hem. Her expression looked terrified. "Please," she whispered. "Don't trust the voices." Then the hallway light above flickered once. The woman vanished instantly. The creature near my bedroom let out a low, rattling sound that almost resembled laughter. "Some pieces stay awake longer," it said softly. My entire body went cold. Pieces. That word kept echoing inside my skull while the house groaned around us. The hidden thing beneath the farmhouse slammed upward again, hard enough to crack part of the hallway ceiling. Plaster rained across the floorboards. The creature stopped smiling after that, for the first time since I'd seen it. Something almost nervous crossed its face. Then the whistle came again. Not from the creature this time. From outside. Dozens of whistles drifting through the storm around the farmhouse all at once. 3-note calls answering each other across the fields. The creature's head slowly turned toward the window, listening. Another slam shook the house below us, this one louder, deeper, like something enormous striking metal underground. Then a new sound joined it. Chains. Heavy chains dragging slowly somewhere beneath the floorboards. The creature near the bedroom twitched violently after hearing them. He woke it. It whispered. Fear entered its voice for the first time. Real fear. The realization hit me immediately. Whatever lived beneath the house terrified even this thing. I backed toward the staircase carefully, while the creature watched me with those black, shifting eyes. "What are you?" I asked before I could stop myself. The thing smiled again, though weaker now. "Hungry," it whispered. Then every light in the hallway exploded at once. Glass burst outward. Darkness swallowed everything instantly. I fired blindly as something lunged toward me through the blackness. The gunshot deafened me while bodies collided hard against the hallway wall. My flashlight spun away across the floorboards. I felt cold hands brush my face. Too many fingers. Wet skin. Then another impact from beneath the house shook the hallway violently enough to separate us. I hit the staircase railing hard while the creature crashed into the opposite wall with an inhuman screech. Moonlight flashed through the hallway window, just long enough for me to see it clearly sprawled across the floor. Its limbs bent backward beneath the coat now, jaw hanging partially unhinged. Several different human voices whispered weakly beneath its breathing, crying, begging, praying. The sound nearly broke me emotionally because none of them sounded fake. They sounded trapped. The creature snapped its head toward me unnaturally fast. He fed us to it. Dozens of voices whispered together from inside its throat. Then it crawled sideways up the hallway wall like a spider. I ran. Pure instinct took over completely. I flew down the staircase 2 steps at a time while the thing slammed across the ceiling overhead, following me upside down. Wood cracked behind me. Wet hands slapped rapidly against the ceiling board. I reached the kitchen just as the pantry door burst open by itself. Cold air exploded outward, carrying the smell of wet earth and rot so strong it made my eyes water instantly. The hidden trapdoor beneath the pantry stood wide open now. Darkness stretched downward beneath it, and from somewhere deep below came the sound of massive chains dragging slowly across concrete. Clang, drag, clang. Every instinct screamed at me not to look down there. But another voice echoed upward through the darkness. My grandfather's real voice this time. Weak, exhausted. He whispered, "Close the second door." Tears hit my eyes immediately because somehow I knew it was actually him. Not the creature, not imitation. Something about the voice carried weight, and Pain the Mimic never managed to copy correctly. Then the thing upstairs screamed. A horrible, distorted howl that rattled every window in the farmhouse. The whistles outside stopped instantly afterward. Silence crushed the property again. Then footsteps approached the house from the field. Not one set, many. Slow, synchronized crunching through the snow toward the porch. I turned toward the kitchen window and nearly lost my breath. Shapes surrounded the farmhouse now. At least a dozen tall figures standing motionless just beyond the porch light. Some wore pieces of old clothing. Some looked partially human from a distance. Others bent wrong beneath their skin like broken scarecrows stuffed with moving bones. All of them stared toward the pantry. Not me. The open door beneath the house. Another chain dragged somewhere deep underground. Then came a low sound from below that I felt more than heard. A breathing noise so huge and deep it vibrated through the floorboards beneath my feet. The creature upstairs shrieked again. Terrified this time, and from the darkness under the pantry stairs, something enormous began slowly climbing upward toward the house. The sound climbing up from beneath the pantry didn't resemble footsteps at first. It sounded more like enormous weight dragging slowly across stone. Chains scraping, wet breathing echoing upward through the darkness. The entire farmhouse trembled with each movement below, while the creatures outside stood perfectly still around the property watching the open trapdoor. Snow drifted sideways across the windows under the weak porch lights, and for one horrible moment the whole world felt frozen around that opening in the floor. Then the thing upstairs screamed again, loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling beams. The sound carried actual panic now. I looked toward the staircase just as something crashed violently through the second floor railing above. Wood exploded downward into the living room. The creature landed hard on the floor in a twisted pile of limbs and old clothing before scrambling backward on all fours toward the far wall. It no longer even tried looking human. My grandfather's coat hung torn around a body stretched too long beneath gray skin that twitched constantly like insects moved underneath it. Several faces pushed faintly beneath the flesh around its neck and shoulders. Human faces, half-formed, mouths opening and closing soundlessly before sinking back under the skin again. I stumbled away instinctively while raising the revolver. The creature ignored me completely. It stared toward the pantry with black, terrified eyes, while a low growling sound vibrated inside its chest. It whispered weakly, "No, no, no." Another chain dragged below us. Clang, drag, clang. Then something massive struck the underside of the floor once. Boom. Every light bulb in the kitchen burst instantly. Darkness swallowed the room except for faint moonlight leaking through the windows. The creatures outside reacted immediately. Their heads all turned toward the field behind the house at the exact same time. Listening, waiting. Then slowly, one by one, they began backing away from the farmhouse. Not running, retreating. Fear rolled through them almost visibly in the way their bodies twitched and bent. The thing inside the house started crawling backward across the floor toward the staircase. "It's awake," several voices whimpered from inside its throat. He woke it. My grandfather's real voice rose again from below the pantry. Weak but urgent. "Ely, the chain." I stared toward the open trapdoor, breathing hard while cold air poured upward from the darkness beneath the house. The smell down there felt ancient, wet dirt, rust, rot, something older underneath all of it. Then another memory surfaced suddenly from childhood. I remembered waking one night during a thunderstorm while staying at the farmhouse. I'd gone downstairs looking for water and found my grandfather sitting alone at the kitchen table with a shotgun across his lap, staring toward the pantry door. I remembered asking him what he was doing. He told me sometimes storms made the chains loosen. At the time, I thought he meant farm equipment outside. Now I realized his hands had been shaking when he said it. Another massive impact slammed beneath the floor. Cracks spread across the pantry walls instantly. Then came a deep sound from below that barely resembled a voice, more like words being forced through water. Hungry. The creature near the staircase shrieked and scrambled upward into the darkness of the second floor. I heard doors slamming violently overhead as it fled room to room. My entire body screamed at me to run outside, get in the truck, flee the property forever. But another glance through the kitchen window stopped that thought cold. The creatures outside hadn't truly left. They stood farther back near the edge of the dead cornfield, now forming a loose circle around the property, watching the house, waiting for something to emerge. Then lightning flashed across the sky beyond the fields, and for half a second I saw one enormous shape standing much deeper in the corn behind them, taller than the others by several feet, motionless, watching. The storm intensified immediately afterward. Wind finally swept across the property hard enough to rattle the windows and send snow spinning through the darkness. The wind chimes exploded into noise outside. Clink, 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 clink. But beneath that sound came another, whispering. Hundreds of faint voices drifting up from the open trapdoor below the pantry. Begging, crying, pleading. I stepped closer before I could stop myself. My flashlight beam shook violently as it pointed downward into the hidden stairwell beneath the house. Concrete steps disappeared into darkness below. Thick rusted chains stretched down the walls, disappearing somewhere deeper underground. Strange symbols had been carved into the concrete itself. Some looked burned there rather than scratched. Then the flashlight beam caught movement farther below. Someone standing at the bottom of the stairs. My grandfather, real this time. I knew immediately. He looked older than I remembered from the funeral. Thinner, exhausted. His face carried years of fear carved into it. Close the second door, he whispered upward, before it crosses completely. My mouth went dry. What is it? He glanced downward behind himself into darkness deeper below. The expression on his face changed instantly. Not terror exactly. Worse. Guilt. We found it in the winter of '78. He whispered, me and Daniel, his missing brother. Snow blasted against the house above us while the chains rattled softly beneath the floor. The field opened during the storm. My grandfather continued weakly. Something underneath was calling. Another voice interrupted suddenly from deeper below. Daniel's voice. He left me here. My grandfather closed his eyes painfully. Don't listen to him. The flashlight flickered violently in my hand. Then something huge moved somewhere beyond the bottom of the stairs. I didn't see it fully, just the suggestion of size shifting through darkness. My grandfather looked back at me desperately. The second door stays shut or it learns the world above. Then the farmhouse shook again as something upstairs crashed through a window. The creature wearing my grandfather's face screamed outside, now somewhere beyond the roof. I heard its limbs slamming across the exterior walls while the things gathered near the field began whistling together again. One by one. 3 note calls drifting through the storm. My grandfather heard them too. His face went pale. They're calling it home. Suddenly all the chains beneath the stairs snapped tight at once with a deafening metallic crack. The sound echoed through the underground chamber below us. Then came silence. Total silence. My grandfather stared downward into the darkness beneath him. Slowly, very slowly, something enormous began breathing below the stairs, deep enough to vibrate the concrete walls. Then 2 pale eyes opened in the darkness far beneath him. Massive, human-shaped only by technicality. And somewhere above us on the roof, the creature wearing my grandfather's face began laughing in dozens of stolen voices all at once. The eyes beneath the stairs didn't blink. They simply remained open in the darkness, staring upward, while the breathing below shook the concrete walls around my grandfather. I couldn't fully process the size of whatever stood down there, because my brain kept rejecting the scale of it. The flashlight beam only reached pieces of shape. Wet skin stretched across something far too large to fit naturally beneath the farmhouse. Thick rusted chains disappeared into the dark around it, like restraints wrapped around a buried machine. My grandfather backed slowly up one step without taking his eyes off the thing below. He whispered hoarsely, "You need to close the second door before it climbs." Then the creature on the roof screamed again. The sound tore across the property in dozens of overlapping voices. My grandfather's voice, Walter's, a woman crying, children laughing, all blended together into something completely wrong. The creatures gathered near the cornfield answered immediately with whistles echoing through the storm. The farmhouse suddenly felt surrounded from every direction. Then came a loud crash upstairs. Heavy footsteps sprinted across the second-floor ceiling. The mimic had gotten back inside somehow. My flashlight flickered violently again. The eyes beneath the stairs slowly rose higher in the darkness. Not because the thing stood up, because it was climbing. Chains groaned under strain deep below us. I saw one massive hand emerge briefly into the weak beam, human-shaped but enormous, with pale fingers ending in black cracked nails the size of railroad spikes. Symbols had been carved directly into its skin. "Burn there." My grandfather's expression collapsed into despair. "We never should have opened it," he whispered. The thing below made a sound then, not loud. Just one deep inhale that pulled cold air downward through the stairwell hard enough to make my clothes shift. And with that breath came whispers. Hundreds of whispers flooding upward through the darkness. Every missing voice the thing had ever taken still trapped somewhere inside it. Begging, crying, repeating fragments of prayers. I stumbled backward away from the trapdoor instinctively. My grandfather grabbed the chain beside him tightly. "Listen to me," he said sharply. "The thing upstairs isn't the real danger." Another crash exploded above us. Ceiling beams cracked in the living room. Something heavy slammed against the upstairs walls over and over again like the mimic was panicking. Then suddenly the farmhouse front door burst open downstairs. Wind and snow roared inside instantly. The whistles outside grew louder, closer. I turned toward the hallway just as one of the creatures from the field stepped through the front entrance. It wore the shape of a woman in an old winter coat, but its movements looked broken and jerking beneath the skin. One arm bent backward at the elbow. Its face twitched constantly between different expressions like memories struggling to stay attached correctly. More figures gathered behind it on the porch. Watching. Waiting. The mimic upstairs shrieked in terror. The creature near the doorway tilted its head upward listening to the sound. Then it smiled slowly with too many teeth. "He's losing shape," it whispered in a voice that sounded half human and half static. My pulse hammered painfully. The things from the field weren't allies of the mimic. They hunted it, or feared what was beneath the house even more than it did. Another deep metallic crack echoed below us. One of the giant chains snapped entirely. The sound shook the entire farmhouse foundation. My grandfather looked down into the darkness with horror spreading across his face. "It remembers hunger now," he whispered. The thing below the stairs moved again. Higher this time. I finally saw part of its head emerge faintly into the beam. Pale flesh stretched tight across something huge and malformed. No eyes except those enormous glowing pits buried deeper in the skull. Its mouth looked stitched shut with thick black wire. But the whispers still poured from inside it somehow. Then the mimic screamed from upstairs using my grandfather's voice. "Diot light itcu." Too late. The thing beneath the house suddenly lifted its head directly toward me. Every whisper stopped at once. Silence crushed the stairwell. Then slowly, impossibly slowly, the stitched mouth began tearing open. Black wire snapped one strand at a time while rotten skin split downward across its face. My grandfather shouted something, but I barely heard him, because a pressure hit my skull the instant the creature looked at me. Not physical pressure, emotional. Memories started surfacing violently inside my head that weren't mine. Snowstorms, cornfields, people screaming underground. The feeling of starving for decades in darkness, while voices echoed endlessly above. I dropped to one knee gasping. The revolver slipped from my hand onto the pantry floor. The thing below wasn't speaking with words anymore. It was pushing feelings directly into me. Hunger, loneliness, rage so old it had become almost calm. Then another memory slammed into me. My grandfather and Daniel digging in the field during the blizzard of 1978, finding something buried beneath frozen earth. A door, not built, ground. Black wood pulsing faintly beneath the snow while whispers leaked through the cracks. Daniel opening it first, my grandfather trying to close it afterward while something climbed halfway through. I suddenly understood the mimic. It wasn't the creature from below. It was Daniel, or what remained of him after decades trapped between worlds, with the thing beneath the field slowly wearing his memories like stolen clothes. Tears blurred my vision instantly. The mimic upstairs wasn't hunting me because it hated me. It wanted escape, freedom from whatever waited below. Another creature stepped through the front door upstairs. Then another. Their whistles drifted softly through the farmhouse, while snow blew across the floorboards. They were coming for Daniel. The mimic screamed again somewhere above the ceiling. Furniture crashed violently. Then footsteps thundered down the staircase. The pantry light exploded overhead just as Daniel burst into the kitchen. He no longer resembled my grandfather much at all. His body stretched too tall beneath the torn coat, while pieces of different faces moved faintly under his skin. But his eyes looked almost human now. Terrified, desperate. "Close it," he begged in a dozen overlapping voices. The field creatures immediately moved toward him from the hallway. Daniel lashed out with impossible speed. One creature hit the wall hard enough to splinter wood, while another folded backward beneath his arms with snapping bones. The kitchen erupted into chaos. Whistles, screams, crashing furniture. My grandfather shouted from beneath the stairs. "Numbo-eli!" The thing below had nearly reached the top of the stairwell. Its massive pale head pushed upward into view while chains dragged uselessly around its body. The stitched mouth hung open, now far wider than human anatomy should allow. Inside wasn't flesh or teeth, just darkness moving. And from inside that darkness came every stolen voice at once. My grandfather looked directly at me one final time. The second door only closes from this side. I realized what he meant exactly 1 second before he shoved me backward away from the trapdoor. Then he grabbed the heavy chain hanging beside the stairs and pulled himself downward into the darkness toward the creature climbing up. "Grandpa!" I screamed. He looked back only once. "Don't let it learn your face." Then he vanished below as the thing from the dark wrapped around him. The entire house shook violently. Daniel screamed louder than anything human could scream. And the second door beneath the farmhouse began slowly closing by itself. The second door closed with a sound that didn't feel physical. It felt like pressure collapsing deep underground beneath the farmhouse. The concrete walls beneath the pantry groaned violently while chains snapped tight through the darkness below. My grandfather disappeared completely into that black opening along with the massive thing climbing upward. And for one horrible second I saw both of them silhouetted against something far deeper under the earth. Endless dark stretching downward beneath impossible shapes moving slowly in the void. Then the door slammed shut. The impact threw me backward across the pantry floor hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Every light inside the farmhouse exploded at once. The screams stopped instantly. So did the whistle. Silence crushed the house so suddenly my ears rang from. I lay there gasping while dust drifted slowly through the darkness around me. Somewhere nearby, Daniel whimpered softly. Human. Weak. I forced myself upright using the pantry shelves while pain shot through my ribs. The kitchen looked destroyed. Broken chairs scattered across the floor. Mud streaked the walls and ceiling. Snow drifted through the open front door in thin white waves. But the field creatures were gone. Every one of them. The only movement left came from Daniel curled beside the overturned kitchen table. He no longer looked enormous. The mimic shape had collapsed inward somehow after the door shut. His body twitched weakly beneath my grandfather's torn coat while black veins crawled visibly beneath his pale skin. His face kept changing every few seconds. My grandfather. Walter. Strangers. Then finally settling into one exhausted human face that resembled old photographs I'd seen of Daniel Green before he vanished in 1978. Tears streamed down his face while he struggled to breathe. I moved toward him slowly, still holding the revolver. even though part of me already knew there was nothing left to fight. "Is it over?" I whispered. Daniel stared toward the sealed trapdoor beneath the pantry. Fear and grief twisted together across his expression. "No," he said weakly. He only closed it again. Wind pushed softly through the open front entrance, carrying snowflakes across the kitchen floorboards. The storm outside had almost completely died now. I could hear the old wind chimes moving faintly on the porch again. Slow, uneven metallic sounds drifting through the silence. Clink, clink, clink. Daniel heard them too. His entire body tensed immediately. "It still calls sometimes," he whispered. I stared at the sealed floor beneath the pantry. The hidden door now looked different somehow. Older. The seams nearly invisible again beneath dirt and cracked wood. Like the house itself wanted to forget what existed underneath it. My throat tightened painfully. My grandfather knew he couldn't destroy it. Daniel nodded weakly. "Nothing destroys it." He coughed hard, then looked down at his trembling hands. Pieces of black mud crumbled slowly from his skin onto the floor. "Your grandfather spent 40 years keeping it asleep." The kitchen suddenly felt colder again. Not supernatural cold this time, real cold. Exhaustion settling into the bones after terror finally loosens its grip. I sank into one of the broken chairs while trying to process everything that had happened inside the farmhouse. The impossible memories still echoed inside my head. The voices beneath the field. The thing wearing people like borrowed masks. My grandfather spending decades alone inside this house guarding something no one else even knew existed. Daniel stared toward the front door silently for a long time before speaking again. "It learns through fear first," he said softly. "Then grief." I looked at him carefully. "What are you now?" His expression collapsed slightly at the question. "I don't know anymore." For a while neither of us spoke. Snow continued drifting quietly through the doorway, while the first pale signs of dawn slowly touched the windows beyond the kitchen. The farmhouse no longer felt watched. That constant pressure hanging over the property since my arrival had faded almost completely. But not entirely. Deep beneath the silence, I could still feel something waiting far below the house. Sleeping again, maybe. Dreaming. Daniel finally stood shakily, using the table for support. His movements looked fully human now, except for occasional twitches running beneath his skin. "You should leave before dark tomorrow," he whispered. "Sell the property. Burn the field if you can." I swallowed hard. "What about you?" He looked toward the upstairs hallway where shadows still pooled thick between the walls. "I don't think there's enough of me left." That answer sat between us heavily while dawn slowly brightened outside. Then Daniel moved toward the front porch, limping slightly. Before stepping outside, he paused near the doorway without turning around. "Your grandfather never stopped trying to save me," he said quietly. "That was the cruelest part." Then he disappeared into the fading storm. I stumbled after him immediately onto the porch, but the property stood empty again. No footprints in the snow beyond the steps. No movement near the barn or cornfield. Just pale morning light stretching across the frozen land. The wind chimes swayed softly overhead despite the still air. I never saw Daniel again after that night. The sheriff's department found the farmhouse damaged from the storm later that afternoon after I finally managed to drive into town. I told them the truth at first, or some version close to it. Hidden basement. Strange noises. My grandfather losing his mind near the end. But I stopped trying after seeing their faces. There are certain experiences people physically cannot fit into normal understanding unless they've seen them themselves. Eventually they ruled my grandfather's death accidental and blamed the rest on trauma and isolation. The farmhouse still stands out there in western Kansas. The bank never sold it. Too remote. Too damaged. Sometimes I still get letters from the county asking if I plan to do anything with the property tax. I never answer them. But every few months something else happens. A missing hunter near the cornfields. Livestock found mutilated along old fence lines. Reports from truck drivers seeing lights moving out there after midnight. Last winter, an entire family driving through the county vanished during a snowstorm less than 5 miles from the farmhouse. Their car was later found abandoned beside the road with all 4 doors standing open. No tracks leading away from it. Nothing inside except mud across the seats and one strange detail the sheriff never explained publicly. Wind chimes hanging from the rearview mirror that none of the family members supposedly own. I still dream about the house almost every night. In the dreams, I'm always standing in the upstairs hallway listening to the scratching inside the walls while the wind chimes ring outside in dead stillness. Sometimes I hear my grandfather downstairs calling my name softly from beneath the pantry floor. Sometimes I hear Daniel whistling out near the field. But the worst dreams happen when the house is completely silent, because in those dreams I eventually hear something enormous breathing far below the foundations, waiting patiently in the dark, learning. And about 3 weeks ago, I woke up at exactly 11:17 p.m. to the sound of wind chimes outside my apartment window, even though I live on the 4th floor in downtown Wichita, and there wasn't any wind at all.